When I saw Tinder on her phone, she didn't flinch. "Why would I delete it? We're not married," she said, and everything suddenly felt different. In a world where swiping right has become second nature, I never expected to see that familiar flame icon on my girlfriend's phone after 2 years together. Hey everyone, before we get into the video, don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button if you want more stories just like this. Thanks for the support. Michael, 28, had always considered himself lucky. Waking up next to Jessica, his girlfriend of 2 years, felt like winning a lottery he never knew he'd entered. Their apartment was bathed in the soft golden light of a Sunday morning, and the scent of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. Jessica was still asleep, her chest rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm that Michael had come to find comforting. He carefully slipped out of bed, trying not to disturb her, and headed to the kitchen to prepare their usual weekend breakfast. As the coffee maker gurgled and sizzled, Michael's thoughts drifted to how they had met. It had been at a friend's wedding, where Jessica was a bridesmaid and he was one of the groomsmen. They had been assigned to walk down the aisle together, and something about her smile had captivated him immediately. The connection was instant, their conversation flowing effortlessly throughout the reception. By the end of the night, they had exchanged numbers, and their first date had been 3 days later. Their relationship had progressed naturally from there. They moved in together after 8 months, combining their lives in a cozy downtown apartment. Michael worked as a software developer, while Jessica was a graphic designer. They complemented each other perfectly, his logical approach to life balanced by her creative spirit. Friends often commented on how well-suited they were, how their love seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. Lost in these pleasant memories, Michael almost forgot about the eggs he was scrambling. He quickly turned off the stove and plated their breakfast, adding a side of fresh fruit and toast. As he carried the tray back to the bedroom, he noticed Jessica's phone had fallen off the nightstand and was now face up on the floor. He bent down to pick it up, intending to place it back on the nightstand before she woke up. That's when he saw it. The screen had lit up with a notification, and there it was, the unmistakable flame icon of Tinder, with a message preview that read, "New matches in your area." Michael froze, the breakfast tray suddenly feeling impossibly heavy in his hands. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Tinder? On Jessica's phone? After 2 years together? He placed the tray on the dresser, his appetite completely gone. The perfect morning he had envisioned was crumbling around him. The golden light now seemed too bright, exposing cracks he hadn't noticed before. The aroma of coffee, once comforting, now churned his stomach. Michael stood there, staring at the phone, wondering how long this had been going on. Was she actively using it, or had she just forgotten to delete the app after they got together? The latter seemed unlikely. 2 years was a long time to forget about something like that. But the former was almost too painful to consider. As he stood there, paralyzed by this discovery, Jessica began to stir. Her eyes fluttered open, and she smiled sleepily at him, completely unaware of the storm brewing in his mind. Michael forced a weak smile in return, his mind still reeling from what he had seen. He had to decide what to do next, confront her immediately, or wait until after breakfast. Or perhaps he should pretend he hadn't seen anything at all, at least for now. While he tried to process this information, the weight of the decision pressed down on him as Jessica stretched and sat up in bed, her expression shifting from sleepy to concerned as she noticed the look on his face. The perfect Sunday morning had been irrevocably altered, and there was no going back to the blissful ignorance he had enjoyed just moments before. The silence in the bedroom was deafening as Jessica's eyes scanned Michael's face, her expression shifting from concern to confusion. She could tell something was wrong, but she couldn't yet identify the source of his distress. Michael stood motionless, his mind racing through possible approaches to this conversation. Should he be angry, accusatory, or should he try to remain calm and give her the benefit of the doubt? Jessica's gaze followed his to the phone on the floor, and her eyes widened slightly as she noticed the Tinder notification still visible on the screen. Unlike the panic or guilt Michael might have expected, her expression remained surprisingly composed. She reached for her phone, picked it up, and glanced at the notification before turning her attention back to Michael. The breakfast tray sat untouched on the dresser, the eggs growing cold as the moments stretched into what felt like an eternity. Michael finally found his voice, though it came out weaker than he had intended. He asked about the app, his words barely above a whisper. He wasn't prepared for her response. Jessica didn't flinch. She didn't try to hide the phone or quickly close the notification. Instead, she looked directly at him, her expression unreadable. She explained that she still had the app on her phone, and when he asked why she hadn't deleted it after all this time together, her response cut through him more sharply than any accusation he could have made. "Why would I delete it? We're not married," she said, her voice calm and matter-of-fact. The words hung in the air between them, each one a tiny dagger in Michael's heart. He had always considered their relationship serious, a step toward a future together. He had been saving money for a ring, planning to propose on their upcoming vacation to Hawaii. But her casual statement about not being married revealed a fundamental difference in how they viewed their relationship. Michael sank onto the edge of the bed, the weight of her words pressing down on him. He tried to process what she was saying, to understand the meaning behind her statement. Was she suggesting that marriage was the only milestone that would require such exclusivity? Or was she implying that their current relationship status didn't warrant the same level of commitment? Jessica seemed to sense his confusion and elaborated on her position. She explained that while she cared for him deeply and enjoyed their life together, she didn't see being in a relationship as automatically requiring the deletion of dating apps. To her, marriage was a different level of commitment, one that would necessitate such changes. Until then, she viewed having the app as a harmless backup plan, something she rarely used but kept just in case. The cold eggs on the tray were a perfect metaphor for how Michael felt. His appetite gone, his stomach churning with a mixture of hurt, confusion, and anger. He couldn't understand how she could view their 2 years together as something so casual that keeping a dating app was acceptable. The nights they had spent talking about their future, the trips they had taken, the way they had built a life together, it all felt like a lie in light of her revelation. As he sat there, trying to find the right words to express his feelings, Jessica's phone buzzed again. Another Tinder notification. This time, she picked up the phone, opened the app, and swiped through a few profiles with a casualness that shocked Michael to his core. She wasn't even trying to hide it now that the conversation was out in the open. Michael stood up, unable to watch any longer. He walked to the window, looking down at the street below, trying to make sense of everything. The people going about their Sunday morning routines seemed to exist in a different world, one where relationships were straightforward and commitment meant something. He felt as though the ground had shifted beneath his feet, leaving him unsteady and unsure of everything he thought he knew about his life with Jessica. The conversation that followed was difficult and painful. Michael tried to explain how her casual attitude toward the dating app made him feel. Like their relationship was less serious than he had believed, like he was just an option rather than a priority. Jessica, in turn, tried to explain her perspective, that it wasn't about him not being enough, but rather about maintaining her independence and having options in case things didn't work out between them. By the time they finished talking, the sun had risen higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the room. The breakfast was completely cold now, a forgotten remnant of the perfect morning Michael had planned. The relationship they had built over 2 years suddenly felt fragile, built on different foundations than Michael had believed. As he looked at Jessica, he realized that he didn't really know her at all, not in the way he thought he did. And that realization was more painful than any discovery of infidelity could have been. The days following the Tinder revelation were a blur of tension and uncertainty for Michael. What had once been a comfortable routine now felt like walking on eggshells. Every notification on Jessica's phone made him flinch, wondering if it was another message from a potential match. The apartment, once a sanctuary of shared happiness, now felt like a stage where they both performed roles in a play whose ending had suddenly become unclear. Michael found himself replaying moments from their relationship, searching for clues he might have missed. He remembered times when Jessica had been secretive with her phone, times he had dismissed as her needing privacy. Now those moments took on new significance, casting shadows of doubt over memories he had once cherished. The weekend trip they had taken to the mountains last autumn, had she been checking matches while he slept? The dinner with his parents where she had seemed distracted, was she messaging someone else? Work became a refuge for Michael, a place where he could focus on code and logic, things that made sense in a way his relationship no longer did. His colleagues noticed the change in him, the dark circles under his eyes, the way he would sometimes stare blankly at his screen for minutes at a time. When they asked if everything was okay, he would force a smile and say he was just tired, unable to articulate the complex emotions roiling inside him. At home, the atmosphere between them had shifted. Jessica seemed to make an effort to be more transparent with her phone, leaving it face up on the table, not hiding it when notifications came through. But this transparency didn't bring Michael the comfort she might have intended. Instead, it was a constant reminder of the Tinder app still residing on her phone, a symbol of the different ways they viewed their relationship. One evening, as they sat on the couch watching a movie, Jessica's phone buzzed repeatedly. Michael tried to ignore it, to focus on the film, but each notification was like a small electric shock, drawing his attention away from the screen. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, he asked if she was going to check her messages. Jessica paused the movie and picked up her phone. As she swiped through the notifications, Michael could see the familiar flame icon of Tinder. She didn't try to hide it, simply responding to a few messages before putting the phone down and suggesting they continue watching the movie. But the spell was broken for Michael. He couldn't focus on the film, his mind consumed with questions about who she was messaging, what they were talking about, whether she was making plans to meet any of them. The next day, Michael decided he needed to understand what was happening. He waited until Jessica went out with friends, then sat down at her computer, knowing she often logged into her accounts there. He hesitated, his hand hovering over the mouse, feeling guilty about invading her privacy. But the need to know outweighed his discomfort. When he finally accessed her Tinder account, what he found both relieved and devastated him. She hadn't been actively meeting anyone from the app. Most of her conversations were brief and casual. But she had been maintaining connections with several men, keeping them as options for the future. There were messages where she flirted mildly, where she suggested they keep in touch, where she implied she might be single in the future. The most painful discovery was a conversation from a month ago where one of her matches had asked if she was in a relationship. Her response read, "Yes, but it's not serious. We're just seeing where things go." Michael felt as though he had been punched in the stomach. All this time, he had been building a future with someone who saw their relationship as temporary, as something casual. When Jessica returned home, Michael confronted her with what he had found. She didn't deny it, but she also didn't seem to understand why he was so upset. To her, maintaining these connections was just a form of social interaction, not a betrayal of their relationship. She couldn't see why he felt so threatened by conversations that, in her mind, meant nothing. This fundamental difference in perspective became increasingly clear as they talked. For Michael, being in a committed relationship meant closing doors to other romantic possibilities. For Jessica, commitment didn't require such exclusivity until there was a formal legal bond like marriage. They had been living together for 2 years, sharing a life, making future plans, but they had never actually discussed what their relationship meant to each other. The realization that they had been operating under such different assumptions was staggering. Michael began to question everything about their relationship. Had he been projecting his own values onto Jessica, assuming she felt the same way about commitment and exclusivity? Or had she deliberately misled him, allowing him to believe their relationship was more serious than it was to her? As the days turned into weeks, the tension between them grew. Michael found himself withdrawing, spending more time at work or with friends, anything to avoid the uncomfortable atmosphere at home. Jessica seemed to sense his distance but didn't know how to bridge the gap. They still shared the same space, but they were no longer truly together, each lost in their own thoughts and feelings about what their relationship had become. The unraveling of 2 years was happening slowly, like a sweater with a loose thread that once pulled causes the entire garment to come apart. Each conversation revealed new differences in their perspectives, each memory became tinged with doubt, and each day brought them further apart than they had been the day before. Michael was beginning to realize that the foundation of their relationship had never been as solid as he had believed, and now that the cracks were visible, he wasn't sure it could be repaired. As autumn painted the city in hues of amber and gold, Michael found himself at a crossroads. The initial shock of discovering Tinder on Jessica's phone had given way to a deeper examination of what he wanted from a relationship and whether Jessica could ever provide it. The apartment they shared had become a space of coexistence rather than a home, each of them navigating around the elephant in the room with practiced avoidance. Michael began spending more time with his married friends, observing their relationships with a new perspective. He noticed the small ways they prioritized each other, the unspoken understanding that they were a team facing the world together. These observations only highlighted what was missing in his own relationship with Jessica, the sense of partnership, of mutual commitment to a shared future. One evening, while having dinner with his college roommate and his wife, Michael found himself opening up about his situation. His friends listened attentively, their expressions shifting from surprise to concern as he explained Jessica's perspective on dating apps. When he finished, there was a moment of silence before his friend's wife spoke gently but firmly. She pointed out that relationships are built on shared values and mutual understanding, and it sounded like Michael and Jessica had never really discussed what commitment meant to each of them. She suggested that perhaps the Tinder app wasn't the real issue, but rather a symptom of a deeper misalignment in their relationship expectations. Her words resonated with Michael, giving him a new framework through which to view his dilemma. Inspired by this conversation, Michael decided to try a different approach. Instead of focusing on the Tinder app, he wanted to understand Jessica's views on relationships and commitment more broadly. He suggested they go away for the weekend, just the two of them, to a quiet cabin in the woods where they could talk without distractions. To his surprise, Jessica agreed. Perhaps she too sensed that they were at a critical juncture, that something needed to change if their relationship was to survive. The drive to the cabin was quiet, each of them lost in their own thoughts. But there was a sense of purpose to the silence, a mutual understanding that this weekend would be decisive. The cabin was rustic and secluded, surrounded by towering pines and the gentle sounds of nature. After settling in, Michael suggested they take a walk through the woods. As they walked, he carefully broached the subject of their relationship, not with accusations or hurt feelings, but with genuine curiosity about her perspective. Jessica, perhaps sensing this different approach, opened up in a way she hadn't before. She spoke about her parents' tumultuous marriage, about how their eventual divorce had shaped her views on relationships. She explained that she had always been cautious about committing too completely to anyone, fearing the pain of a potential breakup. To her, keeping options open wasn't about disrespecting Michael or their relationship, but about protecting herself from being completely devastated if things didn't work out. She also talked about the pressure she felt from society to follow a certain path: dating, moving in together, getting married, having children. While she cared deeply for Michael and enjoyed their life together, she wasn't sure she wanted all those things, or at least not in the conventional timeline. The Tinder app, in her mind, was just a small rebellion against these expectations, a way of reminding herself that she had choices. Michael listened, really listened to what she was saying. He could understand her fears, her desire to maintain some independence. But he also realized that her approach to relationships was fundamentally different from his. Where he saw commitment as a foundation to build upon, she saw it as a limitation to be avoided. Where he viewed exclusivity as a natural progression of a serious relationship, she viewed it as a premature constraint. That evening, as they sat by the fireplace, Michael shared his own perspective. He talked about his own parents' stable marriage, about how he had always seen commitment not as a limitation, but as a source of security and deeper connection. He explained that for him, being in a serious relationship meant choosing to invest fully in that relationship, closing other doors not out of obligation, but out of a genuine desire to build something meaningful with one person. As they talked, Michael realized that they had never really had these conversations before. They had fallen into a comfortable routine, assuming they wanted the same things without ever explicitly discussing their values and expectations. The Tinder app had forced them to have these conversations, but it was clear that their fundamental differences went much deeper. By the end of the weekend, they had reached a difficult understanding. They cared for each other deeply, but their views on relationships and commitment were fundamentally misaligned. Jessica couldn't promise Michael the exclusivity he needed, and Michael couldn't accept the uncertainty Jessica required to feel secure. They returned to the apartment with a heavy sense of finality. The decision wasn't made explicitly, but they both knew that something had irrevocably changed. The crossroads they had reached had two distinct paths, and they were heading in different directions. The question now was how to navigate the separation with dignity and respect for the time they had shared together. The decision to end their relationship wasn't made in a single moment, but rather through a series of difficult conversations and painful realizations. Michael and Jessica found themselves in the challenging position of untangling 2 years of intertwined lives. A process that proved to be more emotionally complex than either had anticipated. The first practical matter was deciding who would move out. The apartment was in Jessica's name, as she had been living there before they met. Michael had moved in, bringing his furniture and belongings, but over time, their possessions had merged into a cohesive whole. Now, they faced the task of separating what was his, what was hers, and what they had acquired together. Michael began looking for a new place, the search adding another layer of stress to an already difficult situation. Each apartment he viewed felt sterile and empty compared to the home he had shared with Jessica. He found himself measuring each potential space against memories of their life together. This living room was too small compared to theirs. That kitchen lacked the natural light where Jessica used to paint on weekend mornings. Meanwhile, the atmosphere in their shared apartment grew increasingly strained. They moved around each other like cautious strangers, each trying to give the other space while navigating the limited square footage. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken words and shared memories that now felt tainted. Friends and colleagues noticed the change in both of them. Michael's work performance suffered, his focus shattered by the emotional turmoil of the breakup. Jessica became more withdrawn, canceling social plans and spending more time alone in her studio. Their mutual friends found themselves in an awkward position, uncertain how to navigate the dissolution of a couple they had always viewed as stable and happy. One of the most challenging aspects of their separation was dividing their shared possessions. It wasn't about the monetary value of the items, but rather the memories attached to them. The vintage record player they had found at a flea market, the artwork they had chosen together for their bedroom wall, the set of matching coffee mugs they used every morning. Each object represented a piece of their shared history. They tried to be practical, creating a system where each would take turns choosing items they wanted to keep. But the process was fraught with emotion. When Michael hesitated over a framed photo from their first vacation together, Jessica told him to take it, her voice tight with controlled emotion. When Jessica reached for the throw blanket they had cuddled under during countless movie nights, Michael turned away, unable to watch. The logistics of the move added another layer of complexity. Michael had to arrange for utilities to be transferred, update his address for bills and subscriptions, and coordinate with friends who had offered to help with the physical move. Each task was a reminder of the life they had built together, now being systematically dismantled. During this process, moments of unexpected tenderness sometimes broke through the tension. One evening, as Michael was packing his books, Jessica came into the room with a cup of tea, just the way he liked it. They stood in silence for a moment, the gesture speaking volumes about the care that still existed between them, despite the pain of their separation. These moments made the process even more confusing and painful. If they still cared for each other, why couldn't they make it work? But Michael knew that the fundamental differences in their views on commitment and relationships hadn't changed. The Tinder app had been a symptom, not the cause of their misalignment. As the moving day approached, Michael found himself oscillating between relief and devastating sadness. Relief that the tension and uncertainty would soon be over, but sadness for the end of a relationship he had once believed would last a lifetime. He caught himself wondering if he was making the right decision, if he should try to accept Jessica's perspective and find a way to make their relationship work. But then he would remember her casual statement about not being married, her continued use of the dating app, and the fundamental differences in their values. He knew that staying together would require one of them to compromise on something essential to their happiness, and that resentment would inevitably grow from that compromise. The night before the move, they sat together on the couch, surrounded by boxes and packing materials. The apartment was in disarray, a physical manifestation of the chaos in their lives. They talked about the good times, acknowledging the happiness they had brought each other despite how things were ending. It was a moment of closure, a recognition that their relationship, while not destined to last, had been meaningful and important to both of them. As Michael prepared to sleep in what would be his last night in the apartment, he felt a mix of emotions, sadness for what was ending, but also a glimmer of hope for what might come next. The process of untangling their lives was nearly complete. But the emotional work of moving on would take much longer. Still, he knew that this painful step was necessary for both of them to find happiness, whether together or apart. 3 months after moving out, Michael sat in his new apartment, a space that was finally beginning to feel like his own. The boxes were unpacked, the furniture arranged to his liking, and personal touches, photos of family, artwork from local artists, plants he was trying desperately to keep alive, had transformed the generic space into a home. The process of rebuilding his life after the breakup with Jessica had been challenging, but he was starting to see glimpses of a future that felt promising rather than daunting. The initial weeks after the move had been the hardest. Michael had found himself automatically setting 2 coffee mugs in the morning, reaching for Jessica's favorite snack at the grocery store, turning to share something interesting from his day, only to find empty space beside him. These small moments of muscle memory were painful reminders of what he had lost, each one a fresh wave of grief for the relationship that had ended. Work had provided a welcome distraction, and Michael had thrown himself into projects with renewed focus. His colleagues noticed the change in him. His concentration was sharper, his ideas more innovative. Without the emotional drain of the uncertain relationship, he had more mental energy to invest in his career. His boss had even mentioned the possibility of a promotion, a prospect that excited him in a way it hadn't before. Socially, the transition had been more complicated. Mutual friends had struggled with how to navigate the split, some unintentionally taking sides, others disappearing from both their lives. Michael had reconnected with old friends he had less time for during the relationship, discovering new shared interests and strengthening those bonds. He had also started exploring new hobbies, joining a hiking group that met on weekends and taking a cooking class that had quickly become a highlight of his week. Occasionally, Michael would wonder about Jessica. He resisted the temptation to check her social media, knowing that seeing her move on would only bring unnecessary pain. Instead, he focused on his own healing process, acknowledging the good parts of their relationship while accepting that their fundamental differences had made their eventual separation inevitable. One evening, while having dinner with his college roommate and his wife, Michael found himself reflecting on how much he had learned from the experience with Jessica. Her casual attitude toward the Tinder app had initially felt like a betrayal, but over time, he had come to see it as a gift in disguise, a painful but necessary wake-up call that had forced him to examine what he truly wanted from a relationship. His friend's wife asked if he had considered dating again, and Michael admitted that he wasn't ready. The experience with Jessica had left him more cautious about entering into new relationships, more determined to ensure that he and any potential partner were aligned in their values and expectations from the beginning. A few weeks later, Michael ran into Jessica at a coffee shop near their old apartment. The encounter was awkward but not hostile. They exchanged pleasantries, catching up briefly on each other's lives. Jessica mentioned that she had started her own design business, a venture she had been talking about for years but had never pursued while they were together. Michael was genuinely happy for her, recognizing that their breakup had given both of them the space to pursue individual growth. As they parted ways, Michael felt a sense of closure that had been eluding him. Seeing Jessica moving forward with her life, happy and pursuing her dreams, helped him release any lingering resentment or regret. Their relationship had served its purpose, bringing them both happiness and growth for a time, but it wasn't meant to last forever. That night, Michael found himself thinking about the nature of relationships and commitment. He realized that Jessica's perspective, while different from his, wasn't necessarily wrong. It was just not compatible with what he needed in a partnership. The experience had taught him the importance of having explicit conversations about values and expectations early in a relationship, rather than assuming shared understanding. 6 months after the breakup, Michael met someone new through the hiking group. Their connection developed slowly, built on shared interests and gradually deepening conversations. From the beginning, Michael was careful to discuss his views on relationships and commitment, listening attentively to her perspective and finding reassurance in their alignment. As this new relationship developed, Michael found himself applying the lessons he had learned from his time with Jessica. He communicated more openly about his feelings and expectations, he paid attention to potential red flags, and he made sure that their relationship was built on a foundation of mutual understanding rather than assumptions. A year after discovering Tinder on Jessica's phone, Michael stood in his kitchen, cooking breakfast with his new partner. The familiar flame icon of a dating app was nowhere to be seen. Neither of them had any need for such apps anymore. As they laughed together over a burnt piece of toast, Michael felt a sense of gratitude for the painful journey that had brought him to this moment. The experience with Jessica had taught him more about himself, about relationships, and about what he truly needed in a partner. The initial pain of betrayal had transformed into valuable wisdom, guiding him toward a relationship built on the solid foundation of shared values and mutual commitment. And as he looked toward the future, he did so with a deeper understanding of himself and a renewed hope for the possibilities that lay ahead.